Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Business of Joy. I'm excited to bring you Toni Ronayne, and thank you for clarifying that last, how to pronounce your last name. A little French, but it's really British. But welcome to
That's
the show.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here, Lisa. Thank you.
Yes, well, what I would love for you to do is just do a brief introduction, and then we'll jump right in.
Awesome. Okay, well, my name is Toni Ronayne. I'm the founder and CEO of the Sea Society. I've been an executive in the restaurant industry for the last couple of decades, and I'm very passionate about hospitality and restaurants and retail.
That's fantastic. Well, and I'm so excited. I've been enjoying watching from the sidelines as you've created the Sea Society, and we'll definitely dive into that in detail in just a bit. But I like to start with is the first job, and I always say first. It's not your, it's the middle school or high school, but it's the jobs we kind of forgot about.
Yeah. So my first job, I was actually 13 years old, and my mom worked at a banquet hall, and I was a coat check girl. So they'd have birthdays and anniversaries and all of these parties. For a 13-year-old girl, it was quite an incredible opportunity because I was able to go out and make money and work with the customers and stay up really late. And I learned very quickly that the value of the dollar, and I also learned about good hospitality and great customer service. We were paid in tips, so it was down to how friendly we were. Efficiency mattered, how quickly you could get in and out, and really just being able to build those connections with those customers. So
I love that. And okay, you get the prize, Tony, because I've heard a lot of babysitting, lawn mowing, but I have not heard coat check girl.
right, coat check girl, yeah.
Coat check
So
girl. So
yeah.
that's great. And then, so how old were there other, so you said your mom worked there, but did you have siblings that you worked with or just other friends or who else was with you at the coat check?
So this was a Greek banquet hall that was owned by a Greek family, and my mom had worked there for a number of years, so we were treated like family. So I typically worked with the nieces and the nephews, and I was kind of the plant from the Johnson side of the family at the time.
Oh, I love that. Well, but there's also something about working like today, like you would never see a kid probably today, 13 years old at a coat rack, right? Today.
Right.
I think those early jobs are just so invaluable. So you mentioned you got tips and the accountability, and
Mhm.
I like the fact you said you got to stay up late.
I did. Yeah. And that was the thing. I mean, as a 13-year-old girl at the time, I don't want to age myself, but there wasn't a lot going on. So, I remember being there late, long nights, sitting there in that closet with, a couple of other girls and just waiting for the party to end. And we were really, really tired. But the most exciting part came at the end of the night when we got to count up all the tips and then distribute them and share them. And every time I can remember the drive home with my mom, and she'd say, well, do you want to do it again? And of course the answer was always yes. So being able to really get a hold of that cash early on and have that responsibility was something I'm grateful for. And as my kids now are 10, 12, and 14, and they're volunteering and doing different things, which is really exciting to see the opportunities that they have. But certainly, having a 13-year-old out until 1 in the morning is not something that happens in our day and age, for any good
No.
reasons.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons, even with
Yeah.
parents, probably. But what's fascinating is, okay, just one more question on this, then we'll move on because I'm just curious. Because you said an interesting thing, which is obviously you take the coats, but then you have to wait.
Yeah.
Like you just wait until the party's
Just wait.
over. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so was that kind of like, do you have any memories of that? Because like,
I, yeah, I mean, I don't have any kind of distinct memories. I remember having to kind of like sit in and amongst the coats, and then, I'm sure that we found things to talk about to pass the time. I mean, it was really boring. But where we were sat, we could actually see the party goers like, going to the bathroom and going back and forth. And so I definitely remember kind of sitting there and laughing about, some people that might have been having a really good time. So I think being able to see kind of a different part of the world at that age and being exposed to that was interesting. And I remember lots of laughs, but I think in general, we were pretty bored. Like we would have been in there for probably 4 or 5 hours,
Well, that's what I was.
waiting for the rush.
Well, but that's what I was just thinking about because there's probably an unarticulated skill there, which is, you did the work at the beginning, but there's this gap until the good stuff happens. And so that's probably an interesting patience. I don't know, but as 13, you probably don't think of it. You think of it as bored, but
Right.
maybe there is.
Yeah, well, yeah, and there was definitely, there was definitely a system to the work. It was like I came in and they said, okay, you have to make sure that you're not losing any of the tags and you have to hang things, in numerical order so that when somebody came in, you could efficiently go and grab that coat and deliver it back. And because it was like a long lineup at the start and a long lineup at the end, and then lots of time in between.
All right. Well, I think there's a little through line because there's operations right there, right? But well, were there any kind of like in school, did you have a class that you just really loved or a class you actually just really didn't like when you were younger?
So I got really involved in the theater when I was growing up, and I've always been drawn to the arts and always been a bit of a natural performer. So I definitely fell into music. I was like the show choir kid, and we'd travel all around and put on these performances. And then when I got into high school, we had a pretty intense theater program, and I was the president of drama club there, and really just invested a lot of my time and energy in that. I was always a really good student. I actually graduated early.
Oh,
I skipped
wow.
a grade early on in my youth. So I always really enjoyed learning and the experience that school provided. But the extracurriculars, I think, are the things that continue to kind of shape my journey. And, whether you're in restaurant or retail or hospitality, like there is an element of theater and performance when you're working with guests. And so I think that that's kind of transcended my experience as an adult.
Well, I was in choir, but I junior high choir, and that was about in church choir for that matter, but I was not very good. So I just did not pursue that in high school, but that's amazing. Well, was there a moment in maybe it just kind of happened as it sometimes does, but is there a moment that you're like, wow, I think I kind of like this restaurant hospitality thing?
You know, I've often referred to myself as a bit of an accidental executive. Like I didn't start my career with the intention to kind of, climb the ladder and become an executive in the industry. But as I've gone on the journey, there have been multiple touch points that I think have reiterated to me that this is exactly where I'm meant to be.
Hmm.
Um, and I would say that, my experience at Starbucks, I was a district manager there, many moons ago, was kind of a pivotal moment for me because I think that that was really the first time that I was. First of all, I found that leadership was accessible at the highest level, and so it wasn't uncommon to walk the halls with, the president of Starbucks Canada, or find yourself on a stage where Howard Schultz would just walk up. And so that was a whole new experience for me to be able to have visibility and access to these leaders that really I never would have seen in other companies that I worked for. And I had a brief stint where I actually left the restaurant industry. I'd been given an opportunity to work for a fashion retailer, who's just a fantastic company, and they've done really great things. And the experience was wonderful. But as I remember sitting there one day and realizing that I just was not in love with
Mm,
selling clothes.
mm,
It didn't evoke the same types of emotions I think that when people are enjoying a meal get to enjoy. And so emotionally I just felt much less connected to that than I have in the restaurant industry. And so it was natural for me to want to come back. And I've really put kind of a stake in the ground here, as I've been reevaluating the last year of my life and thinking about what's next. One thing that hasn't changed is that I want to remain in this industry, and I want to create opportunities for people, specifically women, to continue to be able to realize their potential and their dreams in this industry. So yeah, I think that over time, it's been very clear and evident to me that this is where I'm meant to be. But
mhm.
some of those early experiences probably shaped, that knowing.
So I have a follow-up question on that because as I was listening to that, it's clear, and you, thankfully for the industry, you are here and making such a difference, and especially with the Sea Society. But I want to go back to Starbucks because that's such an interesting, I know earlier in your career, and if you think back, did you really did it sink into you what you just described as far as those opportunities and the presence to be around people? Is that something you think you might have noticed when you were that old, younger back then? Or is it more that you, as you've grown, now you look back? Because I just wanted a curious question.
I think that I absolutely recognized it then. That was my first kind of directly reporting multi-unit role. So I had 13 restaurants in downtown Toronto, all around the Eaton Center. We were the highest volume, highest transaction restaurants in Canada,
Wow.
um, and probably the top five in North America. So we had lots of visibility. People were paying attention to the work that we were doing. We were innovating at that time, all sorts of different operational strategies and programs. We were a testing ground for that work. And I really felt the weight of that role as a district manager. I
Mhm.
was working with store managers, some of whom were older than I was, some of whom had more longevity and experience. And so, coming in as kind of a younger leader, recognizing the mission that we were on to impact people's lives in a positive way, to deliver great results. We actually had launched the Names on Cups initiative, which is interesting because as I pay attention to the news, it's all full circle. And but I was there at the time that we were launching that, so there was a lot of change, and the organization provided us with the tools for change management. I think that was the place where I really started to understand systems and operations. And going on that journey of training and learning how to make a perfect latte, and, the milk steaming routines, and district manager routines. And so all of these kind of tools and systems and playbooks were available to me that, in my past really hadn't existed because those were more entrepreneurial businesses. And so I definitely think that I recognized it. Um, I had sat down with a leader within that organization a couple of years later, and I remember sitting down. He was the president of Tivana at the time, and he said, "You've had a Harvard business degree at Starbucks," and he was right. I really the knowledge and the information and the growth that I had there has definitely shaped my career.
That is phenomenal. Oh my gosh, there's so much good stuff in there and it's amazing that at that young age you appreciated it too. Because when you think about like thinking about how old you were then,
Mhm.
and then think about those workers that are that age today, I
Mhm.
feel like even in my research too, sometimes maybe the younger people don't appreciate maybe some of the skills or the experiences or just the exposure to different things. It's more just, okay, got to do what I got to do. So, what would you tell somebody that was that age, but in today's world, like
Mm.
what to do or how to soak it all in when you're that age?
Yeah. I mean, and I see this now. I think that first of all, I think that there's a thirst right now for mentorship that exists within the younger generations. And a lot of that is, we could talk about this for hours, but the advancement of technology, the way that this generation communicates with one another, this post-COVID reality where we were all taught that we're supposed to communicate behind screens, and physical touch went away, and kind of emotional connection has been lacking. And so I don't think that there's not a desire or a willingness. I just think that the younger generation has been conditioned somewhat to kind of interact and behave in a certain way. And, as I've gone on, whether it's store tours or if I'm out, speaking and connecting with people, I find that there is a real thirst and a real hunger for mentorship, and there is a curiosity. Um, I think that what we're seeing in the younger generations is, these are kids right now that literally turn on their phones and are making millions of dollars a year. Like there is um, there's an instant gratification that comes from connection and monetization in a way that that frankly people of our age and generation haven't ever seen before. And I think we're all trying to catch up to try and figure out how to do that thing. So I would definitely, though, as I speak to kind of, kids in their early 20s, mid 20s, just really recognize and coaching to them to ask for that mentorship and to seek learning in the process, because I certainly didn't know when I was 15, 20, 25 that the things that I was learning were going to pay off now that I'm 44 years old. And those things really do matter. And I'm grateful for that. And so I think being able to recognize that, and part of the work that I'm focused on is I'm working with, like-minded individuals in this industry, is how we can continue to extend that mentorship, that coaching, being accessible to people that want to learn and want to grow, because there's absolutely a need for us to be able to pay it forward.
Yeah, that and another wonderful answer. And by the way, the data that I have supports on Gen Z what you're talking
Well,
about.
there you go.
No, seriously, because Gen Z, I always say Gen Z is the most misunderstood generation because they're not lazy. It's not that they don't want to work. And they're very curious, but sometimes they're afraid to start because if they fail publicly.
Mhm.
And it's a whole, you can't just say, go start. It doesn't work for that generation. Like, just go do it. Even Nike changed their campaign because that message, just do it. That's not a Gen Z message. So it's
Right.
pretty fascinating. But do you think that there was any through lines? I mean, you worked at big brands, like Little Caesars and Perkins and even Freshly. Are there other kind of that journey that you went through that kind of helped get you ready for this moment, which we'll talk about next? But other things, maybe experiences or
Mhm.
mentors that, really helped you along the way.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say the common thread between the brands that I've worked for, as you think about kind of size of brand or type of brand, one thing you'll see in my experience is that there's been a lot of diversity. So, I've worked for full service, quick service. I've worked for startups, fast casual restaurants, legacy brands, turnarounds, you name it. So, they all look a little bit different. And as I speak with people in the industry, it's kind of, you find that people often will find themselves kind of in one boat, and then they really focus on that. And that's what I've done a little bit differently as I've thought about the brands I've wanted to work for. First of all, I needed to have an emotional connection to those brands. That's very important to me. So being a customer first, and then being able to be on the other side of that and feel like I could really impact a business. And so that emotional connection of all of those brands resonated for one reason or another. Number two, I would say that in each of those companies, I recognized that there was an opportunity for me to add value and have an impact.
Mm.
And I'm a very kind of purpose driven individual. And so being able to come in and learn as much as I can about the company and identify if there's a fit there. I need to know at the end of the day that I'm having an impact and I'm leaving a brand better than I found it. So I would say those would be some of the common threads of those companies. And then as I think about, people that have mentored me along the way, there've been so many. And, in this most recent season, I've had the benefit of falling into some really incredible relationships with some women in this industry that the relationships that are not competitive, that are here to really support and uplift. And I think peer coaching is something that is critical for anybody who's going on this executive journey. It is very lonely at the top, and I think um, especially as women, it's important for us to be able to feel like we can be authentically ourselves, that we can be vulnerable, that we can share those things. And when you're commanding a ship, and you're leading a crew, having a vulnerable moment is not something that you want to do with the people on your team. So, I've really focused in the last few years on cultivating some peer-led mentorship and relationships
Mm.
that have been hugely beneficial. But I think about when I was at Freshii, that was a founder-led business. When I left, we had 500 restaurants in 17 different countries. And I was brought on as the VP of operations. I led the international business. I also led global franchising. Also became a mother during that journey. So, it
Oh,
was
by the
a
way.
really well, and we had a pandemic. So there was a lot going on, but I definitely accredit a lot of the growth that I had within that organization to our founder who challenged me to get outside of just being an operator and look at different ways that I could add value to the company. And of course, that set the tone for me to then become the managing director for Little Caesars in Canada and the brand president at Perkins, and diversify my skill set and learn things about myself that had I not had that experience, I might not have figured out.
Well, what's crazy, I was just listening to that, and what's crazy, I was thinking, because you started that part of it, which was you didn't let yourself get pigeonholed because you do turnarounds as startups,
Hmm.
legacy brands, but the emotional connection was something that of course, you know me, of course, I gravitate to that because I love that. But what you just said, I think was even as powerful, which is that dealing with the way I would heard it is kind of it's okay, the ambiguity of not,
Hmm.
trying new things or just that creativity. And it's bigger than just innovation and trying new roles. It's it's probably served you well dealing with ambiguity, uncertainty.
Mm.
I'm not sure where I want to take this step, but I'm not sure. But all of those journeys along the way, probably each one, had its little moment. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny because as I think about leadership values and as I'm looking, meeting with people on to hire on my own team, leading with ambiguity is something that I think is really critical. There was a time where things were very predictable and we could anticipate, what was coming down the pike. So whether that's 6 months out or, and I think that the world has certainly changed and continues to change at an accelerated pace. And so the ability to lead with ambiguity and take something head on and not be afraid to make mistakes, check and adjust as needed. I think that those are leadership capabilities that are required in this day and age. And certainly, my role as a coach and as a mentor is to be able to provide a safe space for people to do that best work and discover those things about themselves that maybe they hadn't identified before.
Well, I think that's so powerful because in today's leaders are not hiring people for what they know, but it's being able to help them figure out what they don't know.
Hmm.
And so that's a whole different mindset, even when you're interviewing people or for you building your team, or then when you're talking about those people to fill those fractional roles, it's really it really is a turning point. Just
Hmm.
it's been building over the last several years for sure. But I want to let's go ahead and talk about the C Society, but I want to kind of start in a place. So I started my company, if you can believe it. You and I talked about it, is, like 17 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long. But one of the things when I started my company, after working at Brinker and then I worked at Frito-Lay PepsiCo, I did have this weird moment. And it was maybe the first 6 months or maybe even 9 or 12, because I was always Lisa Miller, comma, fill in the blank.
Hmm.
And so when you were kind of going through that first time and then decided to stake in the ground, I'm going to do this. Did you ever, and if you didn't, it's fine, but did you ever have that like, wow, I'm used to having something after my name?
Mm. You know, uh, that's a really I'm trying to think about like I connect to that in some ways. I think there's a component of feeling like, and I think this is also part of I think being a female executive, by the way.
Mm.
Um, I think there's always this component inside which feels like you're always trying to earn that credibility.
Mm.
And so moving into a place where now I'm founding my own business, I've started my own thing, I'm doing something that is frankly very uncomfortable, like to try and do something new. And then to attach a certain title or a role, definitely it, it raises some feelings. Um, I think though, for me, what's more important than that? And you asked me at the start of this to introduce myself, and obviously
I know, I
the
saw.
and
You did a
it was
great
be
job, by
brief,
the
and it
way.
was, and it was like, hey, be brief, and those are the things we do. But I was recently leading with a group of women on a retreat, this exercise, and we spent the first day and we all introduced ourselves. And what happens when you introduce yourself? Well, my name is Toni and I'm the founder and the CEO of the Sea Society, and everybody shares their titles. And so, a couple hours later, when I went to actually introduce what I was going to talk about, I reintroduced myself. And I reintroduced myself as, Toni Ronayne. I'm a restaurant executive. I'm a mother of three beautiful girls. I'm a wife. I'm an American that lives in Canada at this time. I'm a survivor of chronic illness. I survived long COVID. I'm an author. And I started sharing all of these other components of myself. And we all then kind of regrouped and did the same thing. And so I think for me, claiming the title is less about the title itself, but more about stepping into this next phase of authenticity, and being able to be the whole parts of myself.
Ah,
Um, and, not just a founder, not just a CEO, not just a head of operations, not just somebody that works in the restaurants, but, who I am as an individual, and stepping into the acceptance and the power of, who that is and all the things that I bring to the table.
I am literally going to tear up.
No, like,
And the reason I'll tell you is when I started my company, so I left Brinker in 2008, and obviously that was not a great, season of the economy for sure. And it was fascinating because, and I know you are very involved like with the Women's Food Service Forum and all this stuff. So literally, here's a funny thing. So, and I haven't thought of this memory in forever. So I had just left Brinker, and it was part of that huge layoff, right? I mean, they laid off 200 executives, and I decided they offered me job A, and I'm like, I'll take the package. But what happened next was at WFF, I was really involved in WFF. In fact, I was like the head of one of the steering committees. And all of a sudden, I am like in this video, and they're like, what do you want your title to be?
right,
Like, I'm like in the opening video. And I'm
right,
like, I haven't thought of that. Like, what? And so, literally, we had this big debate about former, Vice President of Innovation Brinker. Like, do I want that or do I not want that? But here was the funny thing is that at the end, because I was so uncomfortable, because it was, February was when it happened, and then the conference in March, as it always is. It was the best thing ever, though, Tony, because like I announced I was a free agent to the world at that
right.
event. And people were so supportive. But I'll tell you, it was one of the most, I'm watching it on this gigantic, 60-foot screen, and, completely out of my comfort zone. But it was just fascinating that it was the best thing ever. And it took me a minute to get used to the comma Brinker or Frito-Lay or whatever. But now I introduce myself. I am a consultant, but I'm a president, but I'm a rower. I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
I'm a mom of three. I'm an artist. I'm an author. And so that more complete story, I love that. I think as a society, we're embracing people as their whole self, especially executives, especially
Yes.
executives. And I think that's really important. But I want to ask, so two things on Sea Society. First is
Mhm.
the name, and then your
Yeah.
second is I want you to describe your logo because it's very cool.
Oh, okay. So well, I was maybe I'll back up and talk a little bit about how, like, why I had the idea for this,
Sure.
and how, as I was going on my own kind of journey. So I started doing fractional work a couple of months ago. I was working as a fractional CEO for a founder, in Ohio. And as I was going on that journey, much like yourself, figuring out what is my title and what is my role and what's the next thing I'm going to do. And I just found myself really paying attention
Hmm.
to what's been happening in our industry. and in the hospitality industry in general. But we're here in 2025, and there's been substantial layoffs and role eliminations and changes, which I believe are going to continue well into the next year, 18 months. And as I was sitting there observing and watching all of that happen, I was seeing all of these incredibly talented leaders find themselves in situations where they essentially were there in their own shift. They weren't aware of what was going to be the right next thing. Some of them falling into consulting, some of them falling into just significant interview processes. Um, as I sat back and I paid attention to this, I thought to myself, there's a real opportunity here. The emerging brands are growing, and they don't have the same level of overhead, frankly, to afford to pay C-suite leaders full-time salaries. But they absolutely need the right support, and they need the right help and the right strategy in order to get to that next level. And so at some point on my journey, I kind of put a stake in the ground on myself, and I said, I'm not going to continue interviewing at this time. I'm going to focus on investing my time and energy into fractional work. And then as I thought about my network and how I might be able to help my network, then I started thinking about, how do I build a platform for fractional and consulting leaders to be able to come together and really get kind of this curated group of leadership,
Mm.
top talent in the industry. Number one, so that I could help to bridge the gap between, filling their own pipeline and funnel, but then also help the emerging brands meet the right talent. And number two, one thing that I heard as I was connecting with other folks in the industry that do this work is that feeling of loneliness.
Mm.
There's something that happens on that Monday morning after that Friday or that Thursday or that Wednesday, where you sit there and you look around and you say, what am I going to do with myself now? It's Monday. And, I'm used to leading a team of people. And there's a lot of loneliness that comes through that journey, and a lot of grief. And,
And your
as I was
emails,
meeting,
like it's like you're used to getting hundreds of emails, and then
right.
then
And
I
all,
remember that. It was just crazy. I'm like, wait, like it was kind of refreshing, but it was shocking at the same time. But
it's shocking.
I do want to
Yeah.
comment really quickly because, and you're sharing this so effortlessly, and I want to just comment on the fact I go back to that little 13-year-old at the coat rack, and then I also go back to that ambiguity of,
Mhm.
okay, what's next? But you, like at Starbucks, you were doing the job, but you were watching the job. You were watching and
Correct.
taking it all in versus just doing the work. You were,
Mm,
and so I think it's just so fascinating to me when you listen and you hear like all those things that came before that moment, they all
mm,
helped you in that because that came so effort. You, of course, that's what you do. You watch and observe.
mm. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. So thank you for that observation. Yeah, I mean, I did. And as I started looking around and recognizing, I think what people were feeling, and people saying, "Hey, I really see value in the opportunity to do this fractional stuff, but I don't know how to meet clients. I don't know if I can do this by myself. I like working in teams." And so I started thinking about community, and that's really where it started for me. And as I was thinking about, okay, ultimately I'm going to build this platform, which is where we are today, which is what the C Society is, and started to think about what I was going to name it. Um, C, the letter C for me, just it transcended so many things. So, you think about C-suite, consulting, coaching, culinary, community, so many ways
Connection,
that I,
connection,
yeah, connection that's
caring,
the
caring.
all of that
Yeah.
speak to, I think, what essentially has now become a bit of a manifesto. And I mean, at the end of the day, ultimately what we do is we connect emerging brands with fractional executives and leadership so that we can help to scale companies without losing their soul. That's very important to me. I think, scaling with soul is something that, as I think about all of the brands that I've worked through for, and the culture that has existed, another C, it's really been about not losing yourself in the balance. Um,
Need to
taking a brand.
introduce you. Do you know Brett Schulman from Kava? Have you met him?
I've never met Brett, but I do follow Brett. Yeah.
Well, I had him on the podcast the other day, and his whole thing is even when it's humanity, heart, hospitality, humanity, and heart, or something. I might get those words, but even his remodel is called Project Soul.
Mm,
Is remodel. So instead of it being a transactional kind of, most people say refresh, remodel, whatever, his is
right.
Project Soul because he is so, it's these brands are living, breathing organisms. So I think it's magical and it's so exciting to hear that journey. But I love connecting the dots.
Yeah.
It is all of those things, but to see the white space is pretty incredible.
Well, yeah. And I think staying true to myself and my own values, and then thinking about the like-minded individuals that are joining us, y- you know, it's really about bridging kind of the experience with strategy and culture, because you can't have those three things one without the other.
Hmm.
Great strategy doesn't come unless you have fantastic experience for your guests and the execution of that. And you can't have that if you don't have the right culture. So it really is kind of that three-legged stool as we think about how we work with founders and companies and how we want to build.
And so
Um,
for your the groups that you're building, it is cross-functional though, right? Because it's not
It
just
is.
CEOs, it's CFOs, CMOs, innovation. I mean, I mean, that speaks to the reach of this idea.
Mhm.
So maybe share a little bit of that.
I would love to, yeah. So, I mean, fractional work is nothing new. I'm not inventing, the wheel here. But as I looked at the marketplace, there were a couple of areas of opportunity that I identified. So, number one, lots of kind of fractional tech firms out there that exist, bridging all industries, and no great surprise because I think we recognize that technology is fueling the future for all of us.
Mhm.
So, CMOs, there's lots of large kind of firms that focus on fractional work for CMOs. Um, and less kind of common is the fractional CEO. So I've been working as a fractional CEO, and for another client, I work as a bit of a fractional CMO. I'm also working as a chief strategy officer, because like I said, I mean, I do have kind of a diverse skill set of things that I'm interested in doing, and ways that I can add value. Um, but there's a need across kind of the entire industry. And so I
Mhm.
wanted to build something specifically for the hospitality industry, specifically with experts, and try and find the best and the brightest across all of the functions. And so, if you need HR expertise, we've got people for that. You need financial support, we've got fractional CFOs, chief technology officers, chief information officers, COOs, CEOs. And so it really does span kind of all of the ladders that are in place to build your business, including culinary. So, hey, we need some great culinary consulting. We need some chef support. We need learning and development help. And that kind of partnership is going to look different based on the brand. We have a couple of different offers that are available to brands. And that could look as easy as kind of coming in and just doing a diagnostic to provide, a fresh perspective, all the way to projects, longer term strategies, as well as advisory board seats, for people that are looking to build their boards. So it is, we are a bit of a one-stop shop. And I, as I was getting into the work and I thought about, when you're working with founders and teams, quite often they're running around with blinders on, and they might think that they need help in one area. But then when you go and you kind of peel back the layers and you start to really look at the business, you start to uncover that there might be a misbalance somewhere.
Well, and
So.
Yeah, and so many of those mid-sized brands, there's great people there, but they might not just have the reps at maybe some of the bigger brands or bigger because maybe they grew up within that organization and just haven't
That's
seen,
right.
they haven't necessarily seen that. But what I think is so, well, first of all, I just love watching the glow in your eyes. Like I'm just watching, it's just wonderful just to see, I can just feel that and see that passion for solving this issue that's really a big opportunity, in the market. But talk about, because I think what's fascinating too is people are kind of now that the word is getting out and the brand is there and love your LinkedIn is now people are coming to you like they're like
Mhm.
wow, so it's like this magnet, this drawing people in. But what does
Mhm.
it feel like for that pull that now you're getting that people want to be a part of it?
Well, I mean, it feels fantastic. You know, it's almost like we're the worst kept secret because we haven't had our full official launch. We did kind of a quick launch to get some word out. And I've been really intentional about wanting to make sure, first of all, that our reputation is flawless. I want to make sure that when people work with the C Society, that they walk away overly satisfied, that they all of their dreams have come true, that we've delivered on all of the initiatives that we've committed to. And so there's a high level of transparency in that process between ourselves and the brands. And in order to do that, we need the best talent.
Mm.
And so, we've opened it up right now. We are a members only collective. We're an exclusive community, and I've started just kind of initial screens with everybody, talking a little bit about what we're doing, understanding kind of their motivations. And what's been really important to me is to make sure that we have the right team first and foremost. So we're very much in that phase right now of landing that team, and we do though. We've had interest across um, all of those functions, and that's been really meaningful and exciting. And then the next phase of that work is then to really start, getting out there and telling the story of these great
Yeah.
executives. And so over the next couple of weeks, I'll be announcing, who's joined the C Society and who's on the team. And then before the end of Q4, we'll launch our full website, which will then, bring those offers to market and start to build that connection between ourselves and the brands.
So, gosh, it's innovation, it's connection, it's marketing. I mean, everything we've talked about is this launching your own thing, which is just so amazing. But if you think about, I know you're a big part of, the next gen for FSR and then
Mhm.
world. But what is the thing that you're so excited about? And it's not the practical stuff. I want to get to some of the emotional, like why in your heart is
Mhm.
so much of what you want to do? Because you've done an amazing job just building, but what's in your heart to say, why does this matter?
I think for me, it matters a lot because at the end of the day, I know that this is impacting people's lives in a really positive way. Um, as I started working, most recently in this fractional role with this founder, we had this moment where, they looked at me and they said, I don't know what I would have done without you. And I said, well, I don't know what I would have done without you, and so the emotional connection to making a difference is definitely what motivates me. There are so many fantastic people in this industry. It's really one of the reasons why I stay.
Mhm.
And we talked about that earlier, the connections, the relationships, the support, the mentorship. I mean, this industry has it all. And so being able to wake up every day and feel like at some level that I'm going to also have a positive impact on somebody who's trying to realize their own dreams, whether that's grow their business, and do it in a really smart, strategic, responsible way, or somebody who is trying to find a way to build a portfolio life where they could have a full-time job and get into consulting. And being a small part of that is motivation enough for me to
Yeah.
want to continue to do that. And I think that, if you have the right people and you focus on the right things, we're not coming in to work with these brands in a means to do anything but help them to be successful and grow. And I actually think that this is the smartest way to do it.
Mm.
I met with a founder last week, and he said, I'd really like to hire a CFO, but I can't afford that. So I'm going to hire an analyst. And we had a really interesting conversation about that because at the end of the day, I think, and where we landed was, you can hire the CFO fractionally. You
Mm.
can get the work of the analyst and the strategy of the CFO for the same price.
Mm.
And so there's a big component of education here around, well, how could I hire a six-figure CFO and pay them what I can afford? And the reality is that the C Society makes that possible. And so the ability to make that happen, both for the employee as well as for the brand, is really what is motivating me to continue to build this
Well,
business.
and
And
I
I think we're solving a really big problem when we think about labor costs and overhead. Um, and so being able to be at the forefront of innovating those solutions is pretty exciting.
Well, and just that knowledge of, the starting with helping people reach their dreams and full potential. I mean, that's just huge. But even having executives in emerging brands or even bigger brands see that there's new solutions that maybe didn't
Mhm.
exist before. So that's pretty cool. So
Exactly.
I want to ask just some fun questions, which is always kind of my little lightning round. But do you have a favorite book or podcast that you're listening to or reading right now?
Well, I mean, obviously your podcast is my favorite podcast.
Love that. Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about what's the last book I read. I God, we read all the time in this house. You know what, I'll tell you, the best book that I've ever read is the book that my 12-year-old is writing. And she has started authoring a book.
Wow.
And so, every night we get to read a little bit more of the story that she's working on. And
Good for her.
I'm also a writer. And so that's a really nice connection point for us to be able to share. And I'm like learning through her in the way that she's writing. So
Wow. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
so
amazing.
we're working on, how we can fulfill that big dream for her and figure out how to publish that book one day. And but she's fantastic.
That's great. Well, and what a gift of confidence too, and just a shared experience. I mean, there's so many wonderful things on that. But so what is a unexpected something that might give you joy that maybe people don't know about you?
Unexpected thing that might give me joy. Um, you know, I mean, I shared this earlier, but I really love music. And so being able to discover new music is something that I find a lot of joy in. My eldest daughter plays guitar, and she's actually listening to all of the pop punk songs of my youth, and they are, played throughout the house, which is a little strange because I feel like I'm like, looking in the past at myself.
The
Um,
2010s or the, early 2000s, right?
early 2000s, late 90s, that whole thing. And but she's also been introducing me to some really cool new music.
Mm.
And I find music is all over it's YouTube, it's TikTok, like all of these independent artists that are coming up that I would have no visibility or access to. And so being able to have my kids share some of that music with me is part of how I'm discovering new artists. And that definitely is bringing me some joy.
I love that. Well, and we love music in our house. My daughters introduced me way back when to Ed Sheeran because he was like a nobody back then. I
Love him.
I
Yeah.
love Ed Sheeran back when he was doing YouTube videos, not even discovered yet. My daughter
Wow.
loves to find those things. But then the last question is just like, at the end of the day, and you've kind of already shared a little bit, but just to kind of sum it up, but what do you want at the end of the day that legacy for you to be?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, I would want people to say, you know, that she's a good person, and that she lived her life true to who she is. I think, stepping into authenticity is something that we've all probably been chipping away kind of every decade of our lives and as we grow and get older. And it is, as I've gone on this journey, it's more clear to me than ever that being able to live in my own truth is incredibly important. And I think that we can only be who we are. So I think being able to be an example for my children of being, living that life of authenticity and being able to show them that just as they are is good enough and fantastic and a gift to the world. And being that example, that's the legacy I want to leave.
That's fantastic. Oh, that's just what a great way to put a button on this whole conversation, Toni. So, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I'm excited just to talk more with you and keep up with Sea Society and just watch all of it unfold. So, I'm so excited for you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate you and all of the support.
Bye.
Bye.